Debussy's symbolism on the piano, it's based on resonance, is based on analogies of imagination through the sounds for perfumes, scents of nature, or tastes of the taste buds, and also eventually colors as well. Any kind of orchestral, instrumental diversity of timbres compared to the piano's piano and naturally forte. But the point is that you have more like shadows and lights. So you have to layer and voice to bring out, sculpt, like a sculptor, the sounds and their resonances. You can play staccato pizzicato with pedal resonance, scratch on the keys, or then slightly shorter but still touching the keys a little longer, and then if you want the tenuto, ta ha ha ha, or and then you have the pedal, the right foot pedal plays the role of the resonator. It's all about Debussy exploring not only the chord itself factually, it's a dominant ninth, but in the Hommage book 2 from Hommage à Rameau, and it's not functional harmony because we don't go to the tonic. It's just resonances of non-functional chords, but only for their sensual or sensorial resonance. And the combination of bittersweet or half-sweet tastes. In fact, it talks to all our senses more than to our intellect in the terms of structure, where we know what we hear and what we don't. Here it's more about harmonics resonating, the natural harmonic, adding of another tone, and then you have it combined and you hear that. And so it's more about plucking like harp and then having the resonance without the dampers of the pedal up being there to shut down the resonance, but keeping it up or halfway up, or the pedal vibrato or pumping pedal. So it's very interesting because the mystery of the resonance is something that he combines with thematic material, which is more motivic than really thematic in the sense it doesn't develop to become a thought process. It's more evocative tunes. For instance, the opening. It more or less sounds like a plain chant. Here it's open octaves, no major minor because you don't have a determination. Or just empty octaves. Brahms does that in Opus 117.3. And then he fills it in with the harmonies. And it's phenomenal to imagine that in this end of 19th century rather, of the 1800s I meant, around 1890s, Debussy composes in Paris and Brahms composes in Vienna, and they both in fact mirror each other unknowingly. And it's fascinating. The Opus of 119, the last opus of Brahms' Intermezzi, starts with resonance, almost unfunctional chords, but they are functional. Then becomes really functional in B minor. But the opening is just like drops of resonances, drops of water, drops of dew. And then Debussy does that with moonlight, clair de lune. They both explore the resonances rather than the attack of the sound itself, but there are so many different ways to resonate and highlight. For instance, in that section, second half of Debussy's Hommage, Book 2, number 2 of Book 1. You could have muted horns by 4, and a less muted horn, or perhaps another sound, perhaps muted trumpet. Or light and shadow, or soft and rough, or bitter and sweet, or light and dark, or bright and shadow, or tail of the comet resonance. If not, you hear the factual chords. And then you hear the chromaticism rising for the 4 parts harmony with the holding G sharp ostinato, and then on the top you have some kind of motivic. Some kind because it's not defined as a theme that will be developed. It's more emerging from the resonance. He does the same thing later. When he reaches the climax, when before that he develops a lot of restatements, I call it echo cells, or avoided climaxes by almost and then dropping to something else in a fragmented orchestration, if you want. For instance, and then he restates it, like shivers on leaves of a tree, and just here and there. These triplets and 2/8 notes are sort of loose quintuplets. And then these chords like French horns muted or perhaps harps, regardless. And then you can voice those chords or in the tenor or in the alto or in the soprano. But all of them in the mute under the top. And because the top doesn't have to be singing legato, it's not an aria. You have this kind of little bell sound resonances. So that the texture is the difference between the legato of the parallel chords and then, so you don't know if it's a motivic element, a melodic element, or rhythmic element. Most likely like already Waldstein and Beethoven, all in one, without to have a melody and accompaniment. And here you don't know who is what. It's meant to be like a discovery of music world that is like a universe you discover of sensations, of sensorial elements, or some kind of alternatively distant memory retrieval, because somehow the past, the future, and the present in Debussy don't exist. They are in some kind of a perpetual now, which allows to being marveled by everything you see without to hierarchize it into a development and formal recapitulation, even if he does ABA like many composers. It's not the form that matters to him as much as, well, it does, but in a way that is not imposed, like a statement of the mind, as if he does have it, but it's transparent. It's you don't get to see it. You don't see the structure. You only see the elements that come out of it, the light, the shadows, the smells. He loves titles like in Image Book 2, when he combines concepts by calling it bells across the leaves. So you hear and you see and you smell. You're in a garden, you see leaves. You hear the bell in the background or coming across from some distant church, chapel, or any other imagination. The cathedral coming out from the ocean, or any other symbolism, not impressionism per se, though it's same time period as the painters who were called so by reviewers who criticized them, and they took it as a manifesto. But the point is that Debussy was more into symbolism, like the poetry of the symbolists, where the age, the youth, the death, and the birth are like the seasons of life, and then you symbolically compare them to autumn for old age and spring for youth, and so on. And so Debussy is so evocative without to be stating it. It's not a thematic imposition on you. It's almost like as if, like in Satie's music, which he used to call music of background, or musique d'ameublement in French, which he called it, which is more like furniture background music. But when you have this, you could have it a bit like that too, or then you bring out, then you have a different touch, and a different color or shade between light and dark, and the pedal catches the resonance in the tail of the comet. So you feel like all the texture is porous. You don't feel that the stuffiness of the texture. It's in transparencies. It's as if light goes through and you see differently the piece under sunset or sunrise, according to how you voice it. So in a way, it's like a prism. When the light reflects in it, it comes out differently every time. It's almost like as if you rediscover it while you play it. And when you practice it, you explore all the elements that you would like to. You enter in a different dimension of time. You breathe, you exhale, and then you play. One could, and does, describe the music in words, but the music itself talks itself very eloquently. As long as you voice layer, bring out structurally the different elements that you are at the same time aware of in your hearing, and then in your touch control between the weight that you put on each of the micro cultivated tips of touching. Of course, the pianos respond differently because they're industrially made compared to the imagination, but then the acoustics and the pedaling. But once you put all these ingredients together, the recipe doesn't come out always the same way, but that's its charm too. And as a teacher, you give systems to resonate differently when you're from close up or when you do? And you play inside the resonance of the keyboard under the second escapement of the action, and not factual. And then you have an oboe, something sharper, then this is still soft or dull, and then this is sharper. Then the tenor, and difficult crescendo, and then at once subito piano without delay. It would be almost like as if you have the strings with mutes entering after the muted brass. So in other words, coloristic for the orchestration, imagination for the pianist, but not delay when you have to do subito piano, even if the resonance of the drop creates almost a hole in the resonance, but it's supposed to be. Not that it's supposed to be a hole, but it's supposed to be such a vertiginous inversion of the resonance that you feel like, oh, what happened? And then you catch it, you hear it, you imagine it, you keep it on another level, another layer. Beethoven already experimented a lot of these crescendo, almost, but then piano, the yes but no moments. And when he goes, and then in fact, yes, he's thematical and organized and formal in terms of the thought process. Debussy is more by patches of statements that seem to just be there for the sake of the, I find it, vibrant membrane to the elements. Then you have something very striking and very soft inside. And then it drops. And the French horn entered. Well, it doesn't have to be French horn, it doesn't have to enter, but I imagine it. And then the melodies in the two hands stop. The thumb of the left hand above and the pinky of the right hand. And again drop. The thumb more than the pinky for the octave. And then very connected with substitutions, magnetically connected fingers like legatissimo with resonance of bells. If you don't do that, you hear stuffy instead of this. Becomes 3D. In the climax, he uses the major ninth, which in fact is the imitation of the order of the harmonics, but with a dominant seventh. Here it's with a major seventh and the ninth. But it's not a functional dominant to C major, it's just then the C major, you return to the original theme. Which was exposed only with the octaves empty in the beginning, and here, with half diminished sevenths, or diminished sevenths, more like a bedding or coating, and then immediately parallel chords as a coloristic effect. And you have a semblance of a modal into tonal with a leading tone, G sharp minor. One can dwell over these amounts of effects, compare them to imagination, to visual art, to texture that you sculpt with your hands, like playing with Play-Doh, or being a sculptor with a, or imagine that all the sounds come out with the pedal effect of the resonance is outwardly. Nothing is factual, but everything is sort of mysterious, highlighted, and fantastic in the sense of a novel that is situated in a universe that you have to imagine because you don't see it in your daily life. And I find that imagination is probably the key word to play Debussy, to express Debussy, to be Debussy, to be, because you experience it even sensorially on the piano, which instrument you don't touch the string directly, you don't have a vibrato. It's not the voice, the wind instrument. It's not the ballet with the gestures where you. It's not choreographic, but it's suggestive of so many elements. That could be an opera, a ballet, an oratorio, a chant. And it morphs from one to the other into, from resonance to decay. It's just unbelievable experience of the senses. The pedaling in Debussy has many ways to be approached. Since we translate an instrument like Pleyel, Erard, which he had, knew, played, imagined, lived with, which was more like a plucked harp with pedals of piano than the sound of the more rich in terms of wide length of resonance before decay and Oberton's rich modern piano, therefore thicker in comparison, and therefore the resonance delay and disappearance was quicker than today's. So that implies to play elements with finger pedal. Which means to hold them overlapping without all the dampers up of which the right foot pedal produces, and then we have a resonance that is very blurry. Not that the blur is not part of the soundscape of this emotional situation when you have the step motions are obviously sandwiched in the resonance of the pedal holding more today than before. On the other hand, Debussy, nor Liszt for the end of the sonata, didn't have a middle pedal to hold the bass that was held further or here, which would have compartmented holding this. and then play this with clarity. So clarity, blur, fog, precision, coating, and definition. It's to do a lot with what we have as a sound image, and imagination in our head, in our ears, our inner ears. For instance, here we have the triplets. Si, la, sol, sol, fa, fa, sol, mi, re, do, si, si. And this is the motion, but you have also the held decaying resonances compared to the moving triplets. The moving triplets in terms of motion, pun unintended. It is logical to hear in the forefront the motion like it used to be on the harpsichord with a shorter decay. On the organ without decay, then you have the contrary. The long values would, by not decaying, prevail over the short values and would be then on the forefront. So when you explore the different ways to highlight the texture, how do you choose at the end, of not at the end, on the spot, or for the time being rather, because you explore, therefore you change mind, because it's a gift that keeps on giving, this piece, even if you know it for a long time. It reveals itself differently. So you let it reveal to you, but the instrument of the modern piano can, by the length of the resolution of the resonance and the precision of the articulation, privilege one or the other. The instrument doesn't tell you, I cannot do it. The polyphony is not short values in the front or long values in the front. It's a choice you have to make. So how do you make it? You make it by analytical understanding of what is important, what is suggested, and how you hierarchize the French horn holding, the woodwinds playing the thirds, like clarinets and bassoons, and then perhaps a muted trumpet, and then French horn, and then the strings with mutes, playing harmonics, which of course the piano with 88 keys has many octaves. The orchestra from the piccolo to the double bass also. But the colorization almost, well, wonderfully so in the orchestration, distracts from the purpose. In a way, I have to make a comparison. The piano is a black and white photography compared to the colorized photography of the same image. That would be the orchestra with the timbres. So one is suggestive by shadows and lights, the other one is suggestive by the, or if not suggestive, descriptive, by the choice of the sharper tone or a wider tone of a given timbre between oboe, clarinet, English horn, bassoon, muted flugelhorn, etc. And there is one thing that the orchestrations hardly have, some orchestrators manage to do, is to have the effect of the right foot pedal on the orchestration, which is other than the acoustics of the concert hall where the orchestra plays, more or less resonant by itself. But it's also with the combinations of orchestral structured entities, would you say, like the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, the strings, or interlaced dubbings or octaved dispositions, a bit like stops on an organ. But then again, that sort of comet's shadow that a pedal holds is combined with the precision of the articulation, pop, 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 as if you have syllables being pronounced. And naturally, most people don't agree which is right to voice, bring out, or not. Therefore, you have to make a choice: intuitive, analytical, on the spot, or premeditated for whatever reason that is not necessary to be explained. After all, the music is its own language. Like Victor Hugo used to say, don't set my words of poems in music. The music is in the words I chose, in the language. And that is so true for poetic meanings that connect beyond the meaning to the sound that they produce, either to make it as an illustration of the meaning, either the opposite. And in fact, here we navigate in the myth, literally, of Debussy's suggestive world, a bit like in the Monet painting, without Debussy being considered impressionist, which in French was originally, as I might have said, an insult by the reviewer who disliked the paintings and their lack of academic classicism, and rather painting the impressions than the facts of the landscapes, for instance. But in French language, impressionniste is also somebody who is a faker. And so therefore, there was a double entendre between impression of the emotion by the view of a sunset and the sunset itself, if it's detailed or just patched with different techniques from pointillism to whatever. So therefore, in music, I would say that the pedal uses that effect to resonate, not the middle pedal because he didn't have it. Then the quality of the voicing and the touch keeps in the resonance the step motion without to saturate it and become this cluster, but by accumulative resonances. To some, this is too much pedal. I could do yet less. I could voice more the left hand held notes and highlight it from within. Or both. Or bring out the motion rather than the static idle notes. Or voice differently. At some point, when you play a piece of music, you don't just work as a patch on the detail like that, because I demonstrated, but you have to insert it in a whole structure of phrasing that is arched from the beginning to the end of the piece, with the punctuations of the texture, a bit like in syntax. So you say in the beginning, in empty octaves, what later in the recap you say harmonized, and the pizzicato of the staccato in the left hand bottom, and these the strings, perhaps with mutes. So when so much is going on in terms of texture, layering, resonances, combinations which overwhelm one or the other regarding from which point of view you highlight the texture, it's almost as if when you start from the beginning to the end of the piece, you construct it according to how you narrate the story, because after all it's a storytelling, epic, mythical, no syllables, no words, the sound painting of the gestures of the intervals by themselves being suggestive of pleading or exclamation or abandon or sense of delay for anxiety that resolves further down, or acceptance. All kinds of psychological manipulation which the composer, through their written notes on the paper, encoded. And sometimes the notation is a filter that can lose in translation the intent, because sometimes we would like to know how some of the unidentified details in the pitches and rhythms can be or should be or could be handled if there is only one way, or does the composer surrender to the performer to recreate it their own way by trust? Of course, when all composers were performers, all performers were composers, or at least if didn't compose openly, thought compositionally outside of the box, then it creates a possibility to recreate the piece rather than only recite it. But it doesn't stop us from being very detailed at the respect of each of the elements that are there. In other words, it's not disrespect towards recreation or respect leading to of the text scrupulously, which is essential, leading to recitation of the narration, not an appropriation of it. It's a subtle element that is not so clearly determined by border between what and how much you can involve yourself without overwhelming your own expression over the piece's own expression, as if there is a separation between the mirror and the reflection, or between what your opinion of the intent and the representation of it is, even if the instruments have evolved. Acoustic concert halls have perhaps differently, acoustic recording sessions, places have evolved. Nothing of this existed in Debussy's time in terms of electronics. But this imagination to create these moods, these sensations, these shivers, these emotions, and then in between all these elements of the senses, the sensorial exploration of the texture, you have a thread that is the theme. I continue to believe it's more a motif, even if it's play on words, that I try to say which one is what. But I find that because we don't have a fugue, we don't have the development of other than a leading tone arriving on G sharp minor at the end of a phrase, but the rest is with flat 7, more or less modal pentatonic, or just minor modes, descending ancient modes, or so it's not only modal, it's not only whole step, which is so much Debussy writing's signature, but not necessarily reducing it to it. It is to do with how he combines to his own, well, in fact, he's just an inspired person who left us with finding ways to match our own from his, as if we inhale, in a way, his harmonies more than we reproduce them. And why does it mean to us, even if it differently of him or the people who played it then and since and will after us? Of course, referred to a text, but beyond that, referred to the analysis or the interpretation of what a resonance leads to and how you combine a interrupted crescendo to subito piano, and how far do you rise before you drop? Is it mezzo piano? Is it mezzo forte and then piano? It is a fact that when you teach this music, you realize that it's scrupulously written, and when you play it and you hear it, the listener feels that you're sort of making it up because the effort is erased. The vision of the structure, there is an ABA structure, but it's very erased. All what is there is the sense of a perfume, of a structure that is suggested rather than imposed to the listener or to the intellect. It could be that Debussy wanted to keep it into the field of daydreaming and suggest it by little patches through the pedal and what you can hold with your fingers. But there's no indication what to voice out or not and how much. It's something that you build in the culture of listening to his orchestra works like La Mer, listening to his quartet, listening to how he hears. Of course, we can never hear what the composer hears because they hear what, by essence, we haven't heard, and then we reproduce it after we read it from them. But then if we connect to it, it becomes almost as if we are part of the piece, like an actor becomes the character they play to the point to which they identify themselves during that time, which is a present without past and future. It's just an eternal moment, in the say, a suspended time, you know, and we have that. In the coda, you have the G-sharp bell ostinatos, the chorale with chords, where you have the theme, this time, or motif. And a little hint of it that comes as a distant echo, and it's purposely left in 3/2 with lots of half notes, whole notes, so that you have the resonance that drops until you pick it where it dropped. So it doesn't have to be a bump like as if you drive too fast on speed bumps. And therefore, you follow the melody, but also the decay. And the different layers combine, overlap. And everything is thought of, even the stretches of the dispositions that allow for a larger resonance, for longer resonance than if they were bunched. And these wet pizzicati or icicles in a grotto. And a final statement in the middle of the texture. Tone center G sharp minor with modal chords descending. in a way, you want to tell all this while you play to the audience, but you have to tell it through your choice of variety of touches, variety of resonance length, of subtle pedal or half pedal or shivering pedal compared to the more long resonant and the shorter resonant. And the bass and the bells and so more than a sculptor of sounds in a way in the air, you feel more like a painter of imaginary backgrounds and foregrounds. And I find that it's fascinating because how much more technique has evolved in atonality, post-tonality, percussive piano writing by great composers who, for piano, explore the pianism beyond Debussy's in ways that Debussy wouldn't have imagined. But on the other hand, when you hear Debussy, after having heard very contemporary, recently written music for piano that explores the limits of the instrument in terms of the expression and its different ways of presenting, it doesn't sound old-fashioned. It sounds refreshingly renewed. It's a parallel. It's not before, it's not since, it's with. And I find that this is the most helpful way to think of it. It's with, rather than it was before and or since. And it gives us the impression that his imagination outside of the context of his instrument, his acoustic, the way it used to be played, carries almost like a bottle in the sea, a message through the choice of intervals and chords and sounds, a language that if we don't understand, at least we feel. And if we cannot decipher it, we can at least reproduce it and enter in his world, which becomes ours during the moment of sharing with our audience. And if it's misunderstood for some specialists who prefer with less or more pedal, less or more articulation, less or more tempo, okay, everybody is entitled to their opinion, and I'm very respectful of that. It's just that at some point when you play, you display it as it comes to you. Even if you have matured it and macerated it through your soul for decades, it still comes out in the spontaneity of the moment, not as a series of details, but as a whole that emerges from all your experience of the piece. And when you teach it to a student, you don't apply on them like a patch your opinion of it. You observe how they extract the sounds, how they hear it, and you help them hear more than what they eventually heard, or perhaps they make you discover ways of hearing it that you haven't heard because they have a fresh eye and ear on it. So it's a very stimulating and humbling situation when in the transmission of the playing with a student, you realize that you rediscover the piece that you thought you knew. And that is not something you can do with an audience, because the audience receives more than, well, it radiates in return by their attention of listening. But you have sometimes discussions with the student who disagrees the way you like it or handle it, and you try to find a fingering that fits the student more than yours, of course. You adapt, you adopt, you accept to disagree. At such level, it's fascinating because you realize that we are all children in front of the piece, and that even if some of us feel adults, we shouldn't grow too deep our convictions, but maintain them very meaningfully connected to us, just not to the point to which we would disagree, or agree rather to disagree. It's a very humbling situation, and I wish it to all generations to come to experience it, because I find it I'm very grateful to my teachers, and I'm very grateful to my students. And of course, I'm very grateful to Debussy for having given us this opportunity. Thank you.